Thank you for joining us for our 2022 Days of Remembrance commemoration. I'm Stuart Eizenstat and have the privilege to serve as chairman of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Every day, the museum honors the memory of the victims and teaches the lessons of Holocaust history. These lessons are both timeless and timely, but today is an especially moving and meaningful day, for today we pause to focus solely on the victims, to reflect on who they were before they became victims. Nazi Germany set out to murder every Jew in Europe and tragically succeeded in killing 6 million men, women, and children. We pay homage to them, remember them, learn lessons from them. This is always a day of immense sorrow and deep reflection. Yet this year, Days of Remembrance happens as the Ukrainian people are fighting to preserve their freedom from a Russian invader who outrageously misappropriates the terms of the Holocaust by falsely claiming denazification and genocide prevention as the pretext for a totally unprovoked invasion of a peaceful, sovereign nation. The Germans and their local helpers killed 1.5 million Jews in Ukraine. Today we remember them and all the victims of the Holocaust. And today we hear from some who survived. These survivors bear witness for their families and loved ones. They bear witness to teach us, to warn us, and to inspire us. Now, let's hear their stories.
I come from a family of 6 children. We enjoyed school, had lots of friends, and life was normal. We lived in a farming village called Votraj, which was part of Czechoslovakia when I was born. It was then controlled by Hungary. Now it is Ukraine. It is hard to explain how suddenly and dramatically our lives changed in 1944, when Nazi Germany occupied Hungary and took control of my hometown. Local officials came to our home and demanded all our money and valuables. Hungarian authorities took us to a ghetto where we stayed for 3 weeks. We were ordered to board a cattle train. My family struggled to stay together. The train took us to Auschwitz. I was 13 years old. The door of the train opened, and guards shouted at us to get out and leave our belongings behind. First, men were separated into a different line, then the women and children. Then my mother and younger brothers were sent in another direction. I was holding the hand of my 11-year-old sister, Edith, when a guard separated her from me, and she disappeared into the fast-moving crowd. I never saw my mother, father, and younger siblings again. Out of our family of 8, only my older sister Serena and I survived the Holocaust. The trauma of that separation has stayed with me to this day.
Wilhelm and Johanna Schiescher were among the 6 million Jews who did not survive. Before the Holocaust, they were raising their family in Wiener Neustadt, Austria, where they owned a clothing store. Germany annexed its neighbour Austria to fulfill its goal of uniting the so-called master race in a Nazi empire. That meant that Jews like the Schieschers faced persecution. The Nazis seized Wilhelm and Johanna's business and transferred it to non-Jews. The Schieschers also were forced to sell their home. Their possessions were stolen. Wilhelm was arrested and imprisoned for 10 days during Kristallnacht, a wave of anti-Jewish violence that Nazi leaders organised in November 1938. Even their 11-year-old daughter Lily felt the impact of Nazi persecution and prejudice. A friend stopped walking to school with her, and ultimately, she was expelled from school. The Shisha's son, Adi, aged 24, escaped Nazi Austria for Palestine. Wilhelm and Johanna knew Lily had to leave too. They made the agonizing decision to say goodbye, to protect her. They sent her to England along with other Jewish child refugees. They didn't know it would be the last time they would see each other. For the next 2 years, Wilhelm and Johanna tried to obtain visas to emigrate so they could reunite with Lily. It was a long and expensive process. Before they were able to leave, Wilhelm and Johanna were deported from Vienna to the Apollo ghetto in German-occupied Poland. They continued to write to Lily and other family members, and even sent photos of their life in the ghetto. In one letter, they wrote, "We know for certain, my dear little girl, that you're longing for us. It's the same for us. Just be patient and strong." Lily wrote back often, "You really have no chance of leaving the country? It weighs so heavily on my mind that I can't do anything for you. If you could only be here." The conditions in the ghetto were extremely harsh, and many Jews died there. Most others were murdered in the Sobibor or Belzec killing centres. Eventually, the letters to Lily stopped. She never found out for certain where her parents were killed. After easily taking over Austria and dismantling Czechoslovakia, Nazi Germany's aggression continued. It invaded Poland, igniting World War II. 2 years later, the Nazis attacked Soviet-controlled territory, including Ukraine, which was home to one of the largest Jewish populations in Europe. Special militarized forces followed the front lines with orders to kill Jews and other civilians perceived to be enemies. At first, these units targeted Jewish men of military age, but they quickly started massacring entire Jewish communities, regardless of age or gender. Before the German invasion, about 160,000 Jews lived in Kiev. Many fled the German advance. By the time the Germans occupied the city, there were just 60,000 Jews remaining. Most of them were unable or unwilling to leave. They were mainly women, children, elderly, and the infirm. Over 2 days in September 1941, more than 33,000 of Kiev's Jews were massacred at a ravine called Babin Yar. German authorities ordered victims to the site. With the help of auxiliaries, they made them undress and forced them to enter the ravine. The perpetrators shot them in small groups. Dina Pronechiva, a survivor, later testified, "With my own eyes, I saw this horror, terrible cries of panic-stricken people, and quiet children's voices calling, 'Mother, Mother,' reached me." Before she, too, was shot, Dina fell into the pit. "I pretended to be dead. Those who had been killed or wounded were lying under me and on top of me. Many were still breathing, others were moaning. Suddenly, I heard a child weeping, and the cry, 'Mummy!' I imagined my little girl crying, and I started to cry myself." At least 1.5 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust in what is today Ukraine. After Nazi Germany invaded Italy, its former ally, members of the Pacifici family met different fates. Rabbi Riccardo Pacifici chose to help Jewish prisoners at an Italian internment camp and refused to go into hiding. Instead, he opened his synagogue in Genoa every day. He was arrested there and sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where he was killed. Rabbi Pacifici's wife, Wanda, had fled with her mother and 2 young sons, Emanuele and Raffaele, to Florence, where the Archbishop and his secretary were helping Jews find places to hide. For one night, the boys hid with their mother and grandmother, but they were not allowed to stay because they were in a convent only for women. The boys were sent instead to a school where Mother Marta Folcha welcomed them. When the Germans learned that Jews were hiding at the convent, Wanda, her mother, and other Jewish women were arrested and deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where they were murdered. Meanwhile, nuns at the school were able to protect the boys. It was not easy because German soldiers occupied the school for a month. Mother Marta taught herself a special blessing in Hebrew that she would whisper to the brothers. They remained in hiding until their liberation in August 1944.
After Nazi Germany occupied my town of Drohobych, Poland, my father's sister, Rivka, and her 2 young children came to live with us. One day, when my mother's sister and I were out of house, we heard the Jews were being rounded up. We hid in a field where we could hear their screams. When we returned home, it was empty. Everybody was gone. And Aunt Rivka and her 2 little boys were deported to the Belzec killing center with other members of my family. Her older son was named Heniusz. He was my age, and we played together before he was murdered. I feel responsible for keeping the memories of my family alive. My immediate family found places to hide for the rest of the war. We spent the longest time with the Sawinskis, a Polish-Ukrainian farming family. First they hid us in their attic, then in their stables, and then underground in a hole during a long, cold winter. If we had been caught, we would have been murdered, and the Sawinskis would have been killed too. Millions of ordinary people allowed the Holocaust to happen, but some people made the choice to help. The Sawinskis saved my life. Today, I remember Aunt Rivka, her son Heniusz, and her other son, whose name has been lost.
Today, I remember Leah Fogel, Meir Fogel, Moshe Fogel, Gershon Fogel, Ruane Fogel, and Edith Fogel. We now invite you to honor the memory of those lost by reading names of some of the 6 million victims and remembering them.